everyone, and welcome to NFL Girl UK Meets. I'm Ms. Bhandari, and this is a show that brings you closer to the game you love. In this episode, I speak with Laura Okmin, sideline reporter for NFL on Fox, and founder of GALvanize, where Laura trains and mentors women entering the sports world. In our interview, Laura shares with me how her career came to be, running her own production company, supporting fellow women in sports reporting, and giving top tips to anyone considering a career in media. Welcome to the show, Laura. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. I'm so excited to be a part of it, and it's so lovely to finally hear your voice, Liz. After following you for a long time, I feel like I know you, and yet I'm happy to finally match a real voice with the Twitter voice.
Absolutely, yeah, it's really nice, and yeah, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Now, you've had an absolutely incredible career within the NFL for Fox Sports, starting your own production company and launching GALvanize, so I know you've got some really interesting stories and insight that I know my listeners will absolutely love. Now, you've been covering, the biggest names in sport on the biggest stages for over 25 years, and you've been with Fox Sports Network since 2002. But how did this all start for you, and did you ever think you'd be in the position that you're in now?
No. I never thought about the future when I started in this business because the present was always so hard. When I first said I want to be a sports broadcaster, and that was almost 30 years ago now, the reaction was always people telling me, you can't, or you're crazy, or you better have a plan B. So every day felt like a challenge. Every day somebody told me I should have a plan B. Every day somebody said, I don't care about your opinion, or what do you know about sports, little girl, kind of thing. So I never, ever thought about what would it be like 10 years in, or 20 years in, or 30 years in, because I was trying so hard to just make it that day in. And it was a challenge then. It still is for every woman getting into sports, crazy enough. But it started where, when I was a young girl, I knew I wanted writing and I knew I wanted journalism. I knew I was a storyteller, and I loved that aspect. When I got to college, I was a journalism major and didn't know yet what I wanted to cover, if it was news, if it was politics. I don't even think I really thought about sports, to be honest, until my senior year. I took a sports class. I was the only woman in there, and I loved it. I realized really quickly there's no better storytelling than in sports. So I started my focus on sports journalism, and my first job was a small town in Alabama. And it was doing news during the week and sports during the weekend. And I was really excited to see, let me see where my heart takes me or my head takes me, which way I want to go. And it was when I stood over my first dead body, Liz, and I was standing there, and there were a couple of police officers and first responders and a couple of news reporters. And it wound up it was a suicide, which is why we were all kind of standing there, waiting. And as we were standing there with the body 3 feet away, one of everybody started talking about what they were doing that night for dinner and going out because it was a Friday night. And so I walked away to compose myself. It was the first time I had seen a body. Yeah. And one of the police officers very kindly followed me and said, I just want you to know we're not being callous. We're not being unfeeling. This is what happens. You have to be able to stand over bodies and talk about what you're doing Friday night, because otherwise this business is going to eat you up. And so I went home and I did what probably most 22-year-olds would do. I went home, I cried and called my mom and said, I don't ever want to stand over a body and think, what am I going to do tonight for dinner? Mm-hmm. And that really helped push me towards sports, which at the time it was such a great break from dead bodies, and it was such a great break from the world. It's just changed a lot since then. Now there's no lines. Now sports, I'm very thankful for my news background because sports has turned into news, and news has turned into sports. There's no lines anymore in so many things in our world. So that was how it started, and crazy enough, that almost was 30 years ago, and I still love it as much as I did back then today.
Wow. And was sports something you'd always been interested in, or is it just something that was just there?
I always loved it. I'm trying to think, you tell me in the UK, but what I would say in America is there's certain states that you're raised in, and I'm a Chicago girl. And so in Chicago, Illinois, you are raised to be a sports fan. You're watching the Bears on Sunday. You're a baseball fan. You're rooting for either the Cubs or the White Sox. It wasn't the little boys did it. It was just that's what you did on Sundays. You hung with your friends and you watched the Bears and you watched American football. And so I've always loved sports. I didn't know I'd make a life out of it, but it just was very natural because I had grown up loving it. And to be honest, I remember when I was a young girl, my mom one time said to me, "I want you to make sure that you're a sports fan, because if you talk sports, one, you'll never have a bad date, and two, which was more important, and I tell this to my young women all the time, you never get left out of conversations."
Yeah.
There's times where I'll always talk to women, and they'll say, "Well, my coworkers all start talking about whatever game, and I don't have anything to add, so I either leave or I don't say anything." And so I appreciated that my mom had that foresight as at a time where women weren't talking sports, to say to me, "This is important for you, not just because I want you to be a fan, but because I want to make sure you're not left out of conversations with men." Yeah. And that has always stuck with me.
That's so true as well. Like, sports is obviously a big thing here, and you know, soccer's so huge. And yeah, you see it in the office yourself. People talk about it, and you're like, "Oh, I don't follow soccer, so I can't join in."
Yeah, and you know what's funny? We always talk about women not knowing sports, but I have a brother who is not a sports fan, and he lives in Texas, and that's tough. Yeah. And so he'll ask me sometimes, like, "Hey, just give me something." So I'll give him something that I'll say, "This is a great insider note. Nobody will know this. This is something about the Cowboys, or this is something about, the Houston Texans. Just say this. That's all you need." And so he'll say it, and I'll go, "How'd it go?" And he's like, "It was perfect. Like, it was such an insider thing to say, and then he doesn't have to add anything else." And so I always laugh at that, but as much as we talk about women not knowing sports, it's really hard for men who aren't big sports fans too. Yeah. There's a whole machismo thing in there also. So it's just, to me, it's something that if you don't have an interest in it, it can feel like you're left out of a lot of conversations, and that really isn't gender specific. That's just the pull of sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it covers so many different things in life as well, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, totally.
Now, of the games you've covered over the years, what has been like the biggest sporting highlight for you?
It's funny. My answer changes as I get older and more appreciative and all of that. But if you asked me 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, I would have said hosting the Olympics. I've hosted 3, which has been incredible. I never, ever get tired of being able to do that. It never gets old, or it always feels like it's the first one, which is awesome. And I just covered my first Super Bowl. I actually called the first one. I have always covered the game, but I've never called one until this year. So those were some awesome ones that I loved. But what I would tell you is, when I play my highlight reel in my head, what I remember are the events that I went to with friends and what was happening in my life. And there's an American broadcaster from ESPN named Stuart Scott, who was my best friend for over 20 years. And Stuart passed away about 4 years ago. And we both came up together. And so we were covering the Chicago Bulls during Michael Jordan and the championship years. And we were both young puppies and starting our careers, and we would sit together and watch these incredible games and say to each other, "Let's make sure that we're always aware of our moments, even though we're watching everybody else's moments." And so those are the things that I remember the most, was sitting next to him during a game and watching Michael Jordan have an incredible game. But I remember my conversation with him, with Stuart, what it felt like. And now I would say the same thing. Any event I go to with my team, and the games that I cover with the people that I love and the people I work with, that's the most joy I get out of my business now.
That's so lovely. Now, reporting clearly mustn't have been enough for you. So what I've read about you is you're very much like me in that you're a project person. You're someone who's creative, and clearly you want more. So you started your production company, LO Productions, and out of that was Profiles, which is obviously a 30-minute series introducing NFL personalities off the field. Now, what impresses me the most about this is not only did you host the series, you were the executive producer, you secured the title sponsor, you booked each guest, you wrote each episode, which is absolutely incredible. Like, that is so inspirational. You're big time living my dream. That must have felt so fulfilling.
Yeah, I love that you said that. It changed my life. It went from all those years being told you don't know what you're talking about, and we could do this job without you. You know, we don't care what you have to say. Being told that constantly, and then all of a sudden realizing I was smart enough to do this. I was smart enough to figure out how to start a production company, how to get an LLC, how to book guests, how to hire producers and photographers, and find a corporate sponsor who would give me money, and then negotiate airtime with Fox and work with the legal teams. And if you would have told me, 10 years in, let alone, when I was really young, but if you would have told me at 25 I was going to do that, I would say, I can't do that. I'm not smart enough to do that. I don't know how to do that. And so suddenly I was doing it. And that gave me, not a shot of confidence, because that's minimizing it. That gave me a boatload, a truckload of confidence in who I was, not just as a reporter, but who I was as a businesswoman, who I was as a woman. And it showed me that I had been playing small for a really long time, and I was listening to everybody telling me what I can't do, and it switched me to, well, what can I do? What else is out there? What are the things I can be doing to make sure that I am getting bigger as a person? I want to continue to grow, not just in this business, but as a human being. And that put me on a different path to start looking at my whole life differently, going, what else do I want to accomplish? I want to stop checking boxes. I was very fortunate to have some great boxes checked. I had Super Bowls, and I had the Olympics, and I had the NBA championships and World Series, and all these great events. The boxes were checked, but I also found myself very alone, and I found myself very lonely and not happy. But I had a lot of boxes that were checked, and that really opened my eyes to, I've got to start looking at my life differently and this world differently, and how can I play? How can I have a bigger role in it?
That's amazing. And I guess through Profiles, obviously you've interviewed so many different players. Is there a conversation you've had with someone that really stuck with you? And who was it? Why was it?
That's such a good question. And I mean this, there's so many, and so many that don't make air. I'm so privileged that every week I work with 2 different NFL teams, and so that means so many conversations from Friday through Sunday, and the conversations that really stick out to me are the ones that I'm not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
Because what I value the most in this job and in my life is building trust and building relationships, and I'm really fortunate to have done this for so long. So now when I walk into a building, there's certain players and coaches that will come find me because they know that I am a vault, and they want to get my opinion, or they want to, tell me something and know that it won't go anywhere. So I've been really blessed to know a whole lot about a lot of people, and hopefully have been a good pair of ears and a good shoulder for them. But I'm trying to think, if there's one that I would tell you. I've had some incredible conversations. When I was a young reporter, so many players taught me lessons. And I remember NBA Hall of Famer Charles Barkley. And I called him one time, and he answered the phone and said, well, Laura Okmin, what do you need? And I was like, whoa, can a girl just call and say hello? And he said, a girl can, you just never do. And he said, I'm not trying to give you grief. I just know that when you call, you need something. So what do you need? And that crushed me, because who wants to be that person that when you call, someone looks down and goes, oh, Liz, what does she want? What does she need? And so at that time, as a 22-year-old or 23-year-old reporter, what I thought was, why would I call? I'm not going to call and reach out and say, how was your weekend, or how was the game? And I also didn't want to set a wrong message. So I just never called unless I needed something. Yeah. And that changed me to all of a sudden go, I don't want to be that person. How do I make sure that when I call, people don't think I need something, to make sure that I'm building relationships, not contacts and sources? And that changed my whole life in terms of how I approach people, not just as a person, but as a reporter that can very much feel like you're harassing people, like, I need this, I need this, I need this. So my whole, 28 years since that moment, or 27 years, has been, how do I make sure that nobody feels like that with me, that they always know that I reach out when I don't need anything. I'm always reaching out just to know who they are as a husband, as a father, as a wife, as a daughter, as a mother, and that I just don't reach out with an agenda. So that's probably one of the conversations I remember, because it really helped set my compass to north.
Yeah, because that's huge, isn't it? Like, especially in that kind of role, like, and I guess as a player, you probably are constantly thinking, like, well, is that person my friend, or are they just after the story?
Right, exactly. And that's, so with GALvanize, with the company I have for women, we literally spend hours on that. And now I also do a lot of public speaking for companies and for people outside of sports. And I would tell you that's the biggest thing that I get hired to talk about, is building relationships. Yeah. Because what I'll always say is, it's the most important part of my job. But let me just say this, it is a job. I have one day a week during the NFL season on Tuesdays, and I call it Relationship Tuesday. And that's all I do, is I reach out. I'm texting, I'm emailing, I'm calling, just checking in on everybody and making sure that I reach out after losses. I reach out after injuries. I don't just reach out, one, when I need something, or two, to congratulate people. I make sure that I'm constantly around. So when they see me, it's not that like, what does she need? And when I started doing a lot of the speaking and training these young women how to be better at building relationships, and I also was training a lot of NFL players how to vet reporters and how to build relationships. And one player that I covered for many years, who was really tough to get to earn his trust. It took me about 2 years. And I said to him, hey, I'm going to start training players, about how to build trust with reporters. Can you tell me the one thing I did that finally allowed me into your world? That took me a long time. Is there something that you look for? And he said, that's easy. He said, with you reach out 10 times, but you only ask for something once. And so I immediately hung up and called Charles Barkley and said, I just want to thank you for the greatest lesson I ever learned. And so that's everything. I don't just do that with my job. I do that with my bosses. I do that with with people in my world, that I make sure to always pay attention to when's the last time I showed up in your life and did it meaningfully and without agenda. And that's something that takes training.
Now with GALvanize, so I first heard about it about a year ago. And I guess for the benefit of my listeners, if they don't know about GALvanize, basically Laura trains and mentors young women entering the sports world. So I guess, where did the idea come from to start in, and how do you see it growing?
It's so funny, because even when you said young women, and I always say young women because they're always younger than me, but when how it came up was, I started seeing all these young girls getting thrown into these positions that I was so thankful I wasn't thrown into. I just saw them getting these opportunities really, really early, and I just saw them not be prepared for it. Yeah. And I always say, if that would have been me at 25 or 30, I would have been really judgmental of the women. But luckily for me, it happened at an age where I was old enough to really feel horrible. And instead of being judgmental, I was very protective and said, what can I do to help? So when they do get these opportunities, they're ready. And I didn't have any mentors, any women mentors. I didn't have any women friends who were my peers. And not because of cattiness or anything like that, but just, again, and it's a really tough business, and it was really hard, 3 decades ago. And so you weren't looking to see who was around you. You were just looking straight ahead to just hope that you got your stuff done, to hope that you were doing everything right. How can I build a career, I wasn't looking to the left or to the right to see who was doing it with me, or behind to see if anybody needed me, back there. And I wasn't looking ahead to see who had done it before me. I just was stuck in my world. And that was hard. There were so many things that I had to go through that I really struggled with, that I would have killed to have another woman who had gone through it or who was going through it to say, how are you handling this? And so I just wanted to create that. And so the first time I did a boot camp, there wasn't a name of a company, and I didn't know what it looked like. I just knew, all right, I want to get a group of young women together and see how I can help. And I found out very quickly, well, one, it took about 3 or 4 months to get 20 women to even want to do it. But I found out very quickly it wasn't about the in front of the camera that I really wanted to help. It was everything behind the scenes. It was all the confidence, and it was all the building relationships, and really how to make sure that you're growing, and that you have confidence in yourself in a business that's going to do everything it can to take it away from you, and that you have a great network of women around you. And so it started there with a small group of women, and then it has really grown. Now our ages are from about 18 to 20 to I have women in their 40s. And it's for the women who are on camera, behind the scenes, and PR and marketing. It's really turned into just this incredible group of women who really just want to be around another incredible group of women and feel supported and loved on and pushed. And so it's been wonderful. And now it went from 3 or 4 months to be able to find 20 women to now every boot camp has a waiting list of about 30 women. So wow. It's grown in incredible ways. And I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud of just the incredible young women, and just women, period, that have gone through it, who are still friends, who are still supporting each other, who still love on each other. And that's been pretty awesome to be a part of that.
Absolutely. And what I love about GALvanize, so obviously your brand positioning is girls compete, women empower. Now that hugely resonated with me, because I've seen it where girls will make side digs about each other. And to be honest, I've had it happen to me. I've probably, without even knowing, done it to other people. When instead, if you think about it, there's this huge opportunity for people to work together and support one another. Why is it that we think that this happens, and how do we get girls to see that, what could be if we just all focused on the bigger picture?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? And most of us, it's always interesting to me. Usually if I see a woman of any age, it can be my age, older or younger, I can usually guess what kind of girls you were with in high school by how you look at other women. And, it's just, that's kind of where we really learn how girls are to each other. And so I was a guy's girl. I didn't trust women. I had a group of mean girls, and so I stayed away from it. And so boys were much kinder to me, I thought, and a lot less judgmental. So I stayed away from the girls. And so it's been the biggest surprise of my life that, my life has turned into women. And it's been one of the, the greatest gifts I've ever had. But it's hard because we all come in with all these preconceived notions about how women are, and any male-dominated industry doesn't help also, because we get pitted against each other too. So there's so much to me that kind of leads us into the negativity. And the GALvanize is wonderful because it's 2 days, and I don't let the women walk in. They literally walk in the door at 7:30 in the morning, and they have an assignment. I don't let them small talk when they get to know each other. I don't let them walk into a room and go, "What do you do? Who do you know?" From the second they walk in, there's stuff they're doing to make sure that the judging doesn't happen. And I learned that the first boot camp I did, probably 11 years ago, 12 years ago now, that I was signing up the girls outside of the room, and they were walking in. And so I'm, meeting them. None of them knew each other. And as I'm signing them up, I have one ear to the door, or in the door. So I hear them while I'm signing them up, and I hear the judging. I hear the, "What do you do? Who do you know? What's your title? What sorority are you in?" I hear all that, and I just kept shaking my head going, this is going to take me all day to undo this.
Yeah.
And it did, because it got clicky immediately. So I had to think about what am I going to do to make sure that every time I'm in charge of a room with women, that there's no judging. And you know what judging is. It's judging yourself. It's comparing yourself, amongst women. So by the end of day one, these girls will come into a boot camp, and they're scared to death because most of them are guys, girls, because they are in sports. Yeah. They don't have a lot of girlfriends. They don't really think they want any. They don't trust them, and they don't know anybody. And what I'll always tell them when we start is, by the end of today, you're not going to want to do anything without each other when we get into tomorrow, when we combine with NFL teams and bring the boys in. And they all look at me like I'm crazy. Like, there's no way in 12 hours we're going to fall in love. And they do every single time. And so at the end of the boot camp, when it's over, I'll always, say, like, we kind of go around and talk about what we're getting out of it, what we're bringing home from the camp. And every time they always say the same thing. Every boot camp, this is now 2,000 girls. They all say, I'm so scared I'm never going to be in a room of women like this again. Mm-hmm. And what I always say to them, the only thing I ask of you guys when you do these boot camps is you have to try to go create this. So if you go to, there might only be 25 of us in this room, but if you go to the place that you work, or if you go to your school, you go to wherever it is that you are, and you go get every woman in that building. And trust me, if you're in sports, there's 3. There's not many women. Yeah. But if you go and you start creating a sisterhood and you tell them, I just came off this magical weekend and I saw what it's like when women support each other. I want to create that here. I promise you will change a culture. And now there's 25 of you, and we just changed 25 cultures. Yeah. And so I depend on them to do that. And what I would say also is, as I've gotten older and more confident and become such a supporter of women, I also don't wait for energy anymore. I used to walk into any room of women and kind of be like, well, what kind of girl are you? Are you judging, or are you a champion? What are you? And I kind of watched that to decide what energy I was going to give back. Yeah. And now what I do is I bring my energy. I don't wait to see how anyone else is. I know that I walk on a football field for 3 hours before my game. I will have eye contact with every woman on that field. I will make sure of it, that if it's every other reporter, if it's every cheerleader, if it's somebody in PR, marketing, as I walk around the field, I eye contact everybody and say, good morning, looking good, like, love your sweater, like, love your hair, sister. I make sure that every woman knows I come in peace. And that, to me, is why when people ask me about women now, I'm like, I just can tell you I don't have bad interactions because I don't spend my time on those anymore. I don't look for those. I spread my intention and my energy, and hopefully that's enough to change somebody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess as women, we spend enough time beating ourselves up, so why would we want that energy from someone else?
Right, exactly. And it's tough. And again, we get pitted against each other all the time. If you look at TV stations, there'll be 1 or there'll be 2 women. And what they'll talk about is how you compare to other women. And I remember this is the best lesson, my boss gave to me years ago when I was working at CNN Sports. And he asked me, he said something, we were talking, I can't remember what, but we were talking about something with my role. And I said something comparing myself to the other women. And he said, you are making the biggest mistake right now. I don't compare you to the other women. I compare you to the other journalists in here. And here's who I compare you with. And it was 2 other men, and we were probably about the same experience, and, and we did the same kind of thing. And he said to me, do not ever compare yourself to other women. Compare yourself to other journalists and be your best journalist. But you're not a woman sports broadcaster. You're a sports broadcaster. Yeah. And I was really appreciative of a man telling me that, because I think most men do put us together and do lump us in of, there's 2 of you, and how do I compare? I have 1 blonde, I need 1 brunette. Yeah. I have 1 woman of color, so I have 1 white woman, now I need a woman of color, instead of just that we should be treated as every other journalist or whatever the profession is. But we're kind of pitted against each other that way.
Yeah. Now, if someone who's listening to this and would love to get into like a media type role, be it writing, video content, more, what advice would you give to them for getting started, getting started out at all?
The first thing is really if you want to be a TV sports broadcaster, or if you want to be a sports broadcaster, period, the biggest thing you need is reps. If you're just starting, you need a reel. And that first job is the toughest job because you're being hired on your potential, and you need someone to see your potential. So you have to have a reel. And the first thing that somebody will say is, I want to, can you hire me? I want to be a sports broadcaster. And they'll say, yep, send me your reel so I can see how you are.
Yeah. And
that first job, that's everything, is what are you doing for your reel? And making sure that it's, I look at dozens and dozens of reels now, with all these women that send them. And what I would tell you is they blur together because it's all these women trying to be sports broadcasters instead of being themselves. And so it's really putting together a reel that makes you stand out. And the way you stand out is by being authentic. It's not by trying to be any sports broadcaster you've seen or you admire. It's about being yourself. And right now, in this crazy time we're living in, and all over the world, this is where you learn how to be a reporter. You take the sports out of the title and you become a reporter. Every day, even in quarantine, we have phones. And are you working on it every day? Are you putting your phone up and are you telling a story? And are you looking around you in this, in your life and going, what story can I tell today? How do I make sure that during this time of quarantine or lockdown or whatever we're all in, how do I keep growing? And so that's the assignments I keep giving my women is every day I want you to tell a story. Is make sure that you're using this time purposefully and you're pushing yourself and really honing your chops of being a good reporter and a storyteller. And again, there's no better time than right now that we're literally living in, unprecedented times. And if you really want to be a storyteller, this is where that comes from.
That's such good advice. Like, honestly, listening to you just makes me feel like, I feel geared up, ready to go.
Oh, yay! That's all I want to hear. That's fantastic. And especially these days, because every morning it's just give me a reason to shower, give me a reason to to feel ready to go. So I'm happy to provide some of that.
Oh, now you've got such a full plate of all the different areas that you're involved in. So, how do you keep a good work-life balance, and what do you love to do when you're not working?
What I would say is probably the most important thing in my life right now is my work-life balance, because I didn't have it for so long. And it goes back to, it was also, I had a great job, but I had a very sad life. And I had to realize that, and I had to come to terms with that. And when I hit 40, everything changed for me. I really wanted to create a life that I loved and not just a job that I hid into. I was so busy telling everybody else's story. I hid behind their story so I didn't have to tell mine. And so my life since then has been making sure that I do lead a full life. And that doesn't mean that it's balanced in terms of, during football, I'm much more, work than that. I'm much more work. And actually during the off season with boot camps, I do so much more. And now I have clients and do coaching. And so there's a whole bunch. But what I would say is that the projects that I take on now are projects that I love. Before I would just, kind of wait and see what came to me. And now I'm very purposeful in everything of how do I make sure that I'm creating a life that I love, and I love to work, but I want to make sure that I'm doing things that I love also. And also my husband and I create projects together so we can work together. So what I would tell you is if I'm not working, there's a good chance I'm sitting around thinking about what I should be working on and what I can be working on. But I take advantage of the days that I'm not, where my husband and my dog are going to be out on a hike or out on the water, out just really enjoying our time together. And for someone who never did that, I appreciate that so much. Yeah. And I'm very blessed to love a job that I don't feel like I switch people or personalities, that if I'm the same at work that I am at life, and I was not like that, 10 years ago. So what I would also say is I've just created a life that I'm now so happy with, and I feel so blessed about. So I don't change. I'm not a reporter, and then I'm a person. When I'm not working, I'm the same person all the time, 365, and I think that's led me to such a full, happy life.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, you can only be yourself. So, yeah, and I think it's so important to be able to switch off as well from, day to day, to be able to have your own life, enjoy it with your husband, your dog, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. It's so important.
And it's tough. And I think if you talk to people, if you talk to people who maybe are over the age of 40 or maybe 50 up, I'm not even sure. But if you say to everyone, when's the moment that you realize that?
Yeah.
I think everybody has a story because it's hard. And I think if you've gotten it young, you probably went through something tough. And if you haven't gotten it yet, you maybe haven't gone through anything tough. And those are always my favorite stories of when people really had that epiphany of it's not about what you do, it's who you are. And I know when my husband and I look around at the people in our life and our friends and our circle, it's people who focus on who they are, not what they do. And they might have some really cool jobs, but that's not what they talk about. That's not how they identify themselves as. It's about who they are. And again, it just, to me, it takes a long, for most people, at least, or I should just say for myself, it took a long time to get here. So I'm so appreciative when I see other people who've done the work too.
That's amazing, Laura. Well, listen, thank you so much for speaking to me today, and best of luck with all the amazing work that you do.
Oh, I so appreciate that, Liz. Thank you for having me, and thank you for especially doing it right now. It's so nice to just have conversations about life and
Absolutely.
What makes us happy, and we all need that right now. So thank you for providing that for me today.
I had such a good time speaking to Laura. I found what she said so inspiring and motivating, so I hope you did too. Join me next time when I'll be speaking to Jennifer King, the NFL's first black female coach in a full-time role, and Washington Redskins coaching intern. Until then, thanks for listening.